So P3 and D1, P3 is all about the diagrams. I'm going to do a quick recap. D1 is all about justifying your design decisions. And people always ask me, how much do I have to write? You should be able to cover D1 in a side of A4 if you're covering the right things. Again, it's a really bad answer for a teacher to give you, but students always want to know what's expected in terms of quantity. If it's quality, a side of A4 will cover D1 for you. But just make sure you go and watch the videos, the playlist first, and then listen back to the live stream that I did on Tuesday, I think it was. Good. So this is the series of deadlines, and you'll notice that there is something due every single week. And while it is horribly unfair of us to ask you to do something over the holiday, I reckon that you will get this done, like I say, within an hour and a half, certainly a maximum of 2 hours, and it just keeps the thing moving forward, and it frees up more time next year when you're back in school to get Unit 15 done. All right, so that's where we are. So I'm going to do a quick recap of this. P3, 4 diagrams is what you need to do for P3. I'm going to really quickly run through any issues, any problems, and run through what these diagrams are about. Again, like I say, this is a very cut down version of what I did on Tuesday, so listen back to that if you want to know more. 4 diagrams: functional requirements, process, data handling, and user interface designs. So they boil down to a use case diagram, a flowchart, a data flow diagram, and a wireframe. And most of you will recognize probably half of those. You'd have come across a flowchart and know what it is. A wireframe is just a mock-up of what your final app will look like, what the interface will look like, so that's quite straightforward. You've probably heard of wireframe from games design anyway. The use case and the data flow are usually totally new to people, or mainly new to people. So the use case diagram, it shows functional requirements. I throw these phrases at you as though you know what they mean. When we talk about functional requirements, we are talking about the functions the app can perform. So for example, making a booking. For example, deleting a booking. Those are examples of functions that an app would do. All right, so it's the things that it can do, but it's a fancy way of dressing it up, the functions. Okay, and this one looks at the functions in terms of what the different parties, the different people or actors involved can do, what the client does and what the students will do. And obviously, being ahead of the game here, you'll have realized that the clients and the client, as in Justin, the guy who owns the driving school, will have a different set of abilities on the app. He can do different stuff to the students, because he's not going to need to necessarily book a lesson. He might need to book a lesson for someone else, but you don't need to get into that. It's the students who book the lessons. It's him who wants an overview. It's him who'll be deleting students and so on, right? So that's what you're going to be showing in this use case diagram. It's the actors, which in your case is the client, Justin, and the students that he has, the driving students. And you're going to look at you're going to depict the actions, what both these sets of people will do. So without any further ado, I find that all the chatting that I do, this makes a lot more sense. There are your 2 actors. Your stick people needn't be nice. I forget who it was last year who created this stick man with a walking stick, a monocle, a beard, and a top hat. It was very impressive. Some might say slightly unnecessary, but if you want to go to town and really make a beautiful stick man, that's fine, but you don't need to. And like I said before, if you want to do this on an A4 sheet of paper and take a photograph of it and upload it, I might think it's a bit scruffy, but it's a use case diagram, so just go for it. Okay, it hasn't got to be made perfectly in PowerPoint, but it's actually quite easy to do this in PowerPoint. Just use the symbols, and then you can drag the lines out. I'd find this quicker to do in PowerPoint because I can't draw. All right, so the actors are the first thing you need to worry about, and then you've got these functions in the middle which go inside an oval. It's kind of important for these diagrams, as well as the fact they make sense, that you actually use the right symbols for things. So they should be inside an oval. The colour doesn't matter, but you've got the stick men either side, your client and your student, and then you're going to put in the middle the functions of the app. All right, and then you're going to draw lines between each of these people and which functions they do. So you can see now this thing simply highlights what the client's doing and what the students are doing. Simples. And that's really quite straightforward. There's a checklist. I did this last time. Make a list of actors, make a list of actions, draw the stick men, draw the lines. Done. Easy peasy. So that's your use case diagram, and you're now 1/4 of the way through. The flowchart is slightly more pernickety, slightly more fiddly, and it shows processes. These are the symbols. With the flowchart, you need to show that you understand what these different symbols mean. The easy one is the terminator. There's one at the start and one at the end. And the one at the start is going to say start, and the one at the end is going to say end. Between that, you're then going to put in your different inputs, processes, and decisions. So an input would be someone putting in, for example, a booking. An output would be displaying something on screen. A process would be something being saved. And the decisions are going to be when the person using the app is going to be offered a decision of are you sure you want this booking? Yes, no. Do you have an account? Yes, no. So those decisions, those are the four. Can I count? 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, forget subroutine. You don't need to worry about subroutines, but ultimately, in fact, just forget subroutines. It's those four that I want to see that you understand what they are. All right. Again, if you did Cambridge Nationals last year, I think you've done this. I think if you did computer science, I think you've played with flowcharts a little bit. So we've got the terminator at the start and the bottom. This is what I covered last time. The decision: does the user have an account? No, then you register, all right, and look at that box for register, and then you go back up to the start and you go down again, all right. Key thing is you've got to have the yes or the no written on the two lines coming out of the decision box. Decision box is that diamond that you can see there, the second one down. The process, a process of registering, because don't forget, input, process, output, that's what you're showing, which is all that computer systems do. You input some data, something's done to the data, and then something's output. That's it. Having done that, you can see that cancel appointment was also a process. So the flowchart rules, these are important. Students tend to make mistakes with flowcharts. Make sure you've got a top and a bottom, a start and an end in those terminators. The flowchart should flow from top to bottom, ideally. Avoid going sideways if you can. No dead ends. You can't have boxes that are just left on their own with nothing attached to them, because then that's a dead system. That means that at that point you can't go anywhere. So you don't want any dead ends. There's always be a place to go back to somewhere else in the system, unless you finish and it's the end, and then you're done. Use arrowheads to show direction of travel. Those little arrowheads that you could see. And then write decisions yes or no. And those are the things that people mainly get wrong. But like everything else, once you've done your work with P2, you know what your system's going to do. It's just thinking about it in a different way, which is why we do it. So the next thing is data handling. This is the third diagram. We're now going into the 3/4 point. The data flow diagram is something that you probably won't have come across before. It is similar. It shows some of the same elements as the previous two diagrams that we've talked about, the flowchart and the use case, but it's got a different emphasis. And the overview of the emphasis is that if you look at this and you can see you've got customer, top left, and then coming out of it you've got order, and underneath order you've got acknowledgement. That is the data. So it's showing the way the data flows between the people, the entities, and between the processes, which are the boxes that you can see there. And then you've also got things like data stores, which we'll come to in a second. So this is a slightly more complex diagram, but I have given you quite a lot of help with this. And if you look at the other video, you will see that I've explained in detail a restaurant booking system, and this is very similar. So if you're struggling, go and look at that and just adapt that for the needs of your app. And don't forget, you're not an IT expert, but the question that both myself and the moderator are asking is whether you understand what this diagram's for. Do you understand which symbol signifies what sort of process, or whether it's an entity? And does it kind of make sense? Have you shown a better understanding of it? That's all we're looking for, not necessarily perfection. So it's going to show an overview of data and functionality, and it's most importantly about the journey that the data takes, the data that you're sending around, the bookings, the times, the dates of bookings, because that's the key thing that's being sent around this system. And I do not worry about the dash cam, because you don't need to include that in there. Focus on the bookings. That's the important thing, okay? The dash cam is a bit of a separate system that's going to be bolted onto it, isn't it? It's a different module. But focus on the booking. That's the important thing here. Where does the data come from? Where does it go? Where does it get stored? And I guess the where does it get stored part is thinking about that when someone makes a booking, that booking is going to be saved on a database somewhere. There'll be a slot. So say 2 o'clock on a Thursday. And that 2 o'clock on a Thursday slot is going to have two statuses. It's going to be taken or booked or not booked. In other words, free. So it's going to be open or it's going to be closed. So when someone tries to make a booking, they're going to be accessing that file that holds that information to find out whether that slot on a Tuesday afternoon, whatever it was I said, is free or not. And if it's free, it will save it on that file and close it in the data store. And if it's not free, it will check that it's not free and then send a message back to the customer saying it's not free, choose another slot. All right. So that, however you organize it, that's what I want you to show that you've got your head around here, is that notion of a slot being booked. A bit like going and buying tickets online from Ticketmaster, and you queue for 45 minutes, you get there and then it says, right, you've got 10 minutes to enter we're holding a ticket for you, you've got 10 minutes to choose your seat, to find your credit card details, to put them in, to not mess up a very long number, and we're going to put you under stress. And if you don't get it in there, we're going to give the ticket to someone else. So it's an understanding of that I'm looking for when we do the data flow diagram. Excuse me. So we've got the people, the entities they're called, and that was the customer. If you can remember, I'm going to go back and show you the data flow diagram again in a second, but that was the customer, the people involved. The processes that take place, so that was also something we were looking at in the flowchart. The files that are accessed, we haven't looked at that at all, so that was the database file I was talking about, the data store. The files that are accessed, within the data store, and then the direction of flow of data. The data goes from here to here to here to here to here. Do you understand that? Don't forget, stick to the booking system, and that makes it an awful lot easier. Don't worry about trying to do the whole thing at one time, because we're not there yet. You're not expected to be able to do that. So let's go back and look at this one that I produced for Cognautics Grill booking system. This is my restaurant booking system. And can you see how we've got the customer, top left, the entity. We've got a process. We've got a data store. We've got the bookings on the right hand side. I'm going to go through this in more detail again in a minute, but I want to get through it because I did this last time and I don't want to repeat it for those of you who've already seen this. But this is what we're looking for. Are you using the right diagrams? Have you thought about what data's flowing? If you miss the odd thing off or it's not absolutely perfect, that's not the issue. But the overview is, do you understand what this diagram's for, what it shows, and have you taken the information from your app and dropped it into this diagram? And could a professional look at it and go, or a coder look at it and go, okay, I can see what data's moving around, I can see where it needs to go. I need to create a bookings file in a database, for example, all right? Because that's not your job. So we've got a title. Please give your work a title. Then we've got the entity, which is the people, and notice that that is a square, all right? A square with the actor, the customer, the person written in there. Then you've got the process, which is the rounded rectangle with that horizontal line running about a third of the way down, and then just write in whatever the process is, searching for a table, all right? And that, don't forget, is a rectangle in a flowchart as well, the process. So get your head around what a process is. Then we go on and we look at the data store. That's where the bookings are going to be stored. So show a data store or a file. I'm going to show both. A data store or a file is fine. That's where the information about the bookings is stored. And that's where if someone cancels a booking, that bookings file will get opened, the slot will be made available again, and it'll get saved and closed. That's the level at which you need to show an understanding here. That's the really key thing. The data that's moving around, that's really important. And don't forget to show the direction of the data's traveling in with these arrows that you can see. So we've got name and email there. That's when you set the app up, for example. And then we're going on to the checklist. Make a list of what data is flowing around the system, break it up into individual fields, time, date, etc. List of the actors, a list of the data stores, or in your case, data store, where it's going to be stored. And make sure you use the right shape symbol for that. A list of processes, what happens, make your diagram. I used lucidchart.com for that, so fill your boots and do that, but equally get your ruler out, get a pencil out, and just draw it out and take a photo, whichever is easier for you. As I said last time, I sadly quite enjoyed doing it on Lucidchart, but I need to get out more. Make sure that you name your symbols and write the name on the lines. That's it. Lastly, the wireframe. The wireframe shows the user interface. So this is a mock-up. This is going to show the customer what his app is going to look like. Because you could show Justin, let's take Justin as a typical client. He knows that he wants the app because he's seen that driving schools like Red and ABC have got this app, right? So he knows that he wants one. He knows that it's going to be for booking. He fancies a few extra sort of Gucci features in it. Beyond that, he's a driving instructor. He doesn't know anything about how this thing's put together. So you could show the client the data flow diagram, and he'd go, "Whoa, that looks really, really good," and not know what on earth he's looking at. But when it comes to a wireframe diagram, that's something that he will know something about, because it'll be the app that he's giving his students to use, and he might look at it and go, "Oh no, that's awful. I don't like that colour. I don't like those buttons. I don't like that text. Oh, I don't like that at all." And in fact, that's one of the things that you're going to be jumping onto with D1 that I'm coming to next, okay? So the wireframe is just giving you a mock-up of what the thing will actually look like. That's why it's called a wireframe, because that's how things are modelled online, with those lines that look like wires, all right? So you're looking for a mock-up of how it'll appear. It's not going to be functional, and it hasn't got the same detail as the final design. This is an example of a wireframe. I would argue you don't particularly have to have the colours in there, but the more time you invest in this, the better, because there's another task coming in later, which is the prototype, where you simply have to do the series of wireframe diagrams. So any effort that you put into doing this now will basically give you a free week, or more or less free week, in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. So your call, but it's probably worth investing more time in this than perhaps you would do otherwise. So list of functional requirements, plan out how many screens, and this again does link to D1. There is a flow to this unit. Plan out how many screens you want to use. I recommend using PowerPoint. It's unless you're a Photoshop guru, it's not worth learning Photoshop for this. Unless you want to, you've got time, of course, but PowerPoint is probably your best plan here. Your design should be, everything in P2 should be in there. Your wireframe should be in the shape of a phone, so the client can see what it looks like. Now, that's all it is. And there's no right or wrong things, unless you put a blank template there, or you show a restaurant booking system. That would be the wrong thing to do. But apart from that, there's no wrong answers here. So I'm going to pause there, and that was a very quick recap, well, fairly quick, a 20-minute recap. I said 10, I lied, about P4. Has anyone got any questions about any of those diagrams? There's a lot of stuff on YouTube that I've put up there on these, but equally, if you've got any questions, stick them in the comments, or could you put them, email them to me. Could you do me a quick 1, 2, 3? 3, I get it. 2, 1, no idea. That was just a complete mystery to me. Could you put a number in the comments, please, each of you? And there's no shame, because I just want to know whether you get it or not. And in fact, I can catch up with some of you who put lower numbers in later on, all right? Because I'm here to help. That's the grand plan today. So that is P3, done and dusted. We've got 3s. I think we had 3s last time. 3s, 2s, 1s. Get your number in there. If you're a 1, just put it in there, and that way I can give you a hand with it. All right, so questions there. D1. Now, I've put a lot of stuff online, I've put many YouTube videos online about D1, but what I want to do is, okay, good, we've got Kane, we've got Anushka 3. Right, so I'll stop waffling on about that, and I'll get on with D1. D1, I'm always slightly torn, and especially doing this with you online now, is that while you want this qualification and it's important you jump through the right hoops for it, I'm also being remiss and not doing my job properly if I don't teach you some of the interesting stuff around design, because the fact you've chosen IT means there's a high likelihood that at some point you're either going to be using some or all of these skills later on in your life. So I make no apologies for some of the stuff that I'm doing is slightly highbrow, but it really helps your understanding of what you're doing and the sort of questions that a designer is going to have to ask him or herself when he's creating a product or bringing it to market. D1, this from the spec, page 7. Justify design choices, identifying the advantages and disadvantages of each. This is an easy thing to do. But as long as you understand that you're justifying your design choices, these are the 3 steps that I'd recommend. Outline the advantages and the disadvantages of each design choice. So you now need to understand what a design choice is, and then talk about why you made that choice. That's what. So, for example, you chose to have buttons with rounded edges. You chose those because you thought that it fitted better within the look on the page. You thought that it was more attractive doing it that way than doing squared edges. You tried doing it with squared edges, but actually squared edges made the entire app look slightly older and outdated. That's an example. Okay, so what you're doing is you're saying, I made that choice, and I made that choice because of X. The problem with doing rounded edges is that perhaps it's not quite as clear as doing squared edges. Do you understand? So that's the sort of area we're going into here, and I'll cover the different sorts of design choices that you might be thinking about, but that's the overview here. Right, so let's get into the technical bit here. On the right hand side you can see this is a screenshot from my phone, and this is a podcasting app that I use. I can't remember its name, but I use this to listen to my Arsenal podcasts, right? And because we're so used to using apps, we tend not to think about what actually sits behind the design part of it, all right? Now, one of the things I liked about this immediately is that I could look at it and go, yeah, I kind of understand what I'm supposed to do here. But you need to understand there's lots of things going on behind the eyes in terms of the design here. So if you look at that you see you've got 2100, 9 o'clock, and then you've got the icons for your battery and so on. Underneath that, you've got 4 more icons. I knew immediately what kind of 3 of those icons meant. I didn't know what the top left one meant, that one that looks like a radio mast. I didn't really know. I mean, I got the idea that it was something about data going in or out. The search bar, and it says search, which kind of gives it away, but can you see also how that bar, it's a different shade. It's not black, it's a dark grey. And how you just know instinctively, because of everything that you've done with apps and computers, that you've got to tap there to type. But that's been designed that way, and you've got the magnifying glass, which tells you that if you click there, you can type. You've got your playlist, then you've got your thumbnails down there, and then at the bottom we've got some icons that again have been around for donkey's years. So in my when you listen to a podcast, you can go back 15 seconds if you've missed something, or you can go forward 30 seconds if there are adverts typically. But you can see also, bottom left now, I'm looking at that, you've got that up arrow, which means that you know that if you click there, something's going to happen. And this is where I'm going to go into a bit more technical detail about two areas called affordances and signifiers. And there's a guy called Don Norman, who is, if you ever do any course at university or beyond on design, he wrote a book called The Design of Everyday Things, and it's the kind of staple that everyone in their first year of university gets to read this book and gets to read it all the way through. In my MSc that I'm doing on game design, Norman's book is there. It's one of the ones you have to read. And he talks about 2 key areas to consider when you're designing something, and that is affordances and signifiers. So affordances means what you can actually do, let's say within a given platform, and signifiers tell the user how it can be achieved. So and let me try and put a bit more sense on this. So affordances. If you look at this screen, and again I've made this, this is a screen print from my calendar app on my phone. And let's look at the affordances here, what you can do on this. So number 1, there's a vertical scroll bar there. You can't see it, but if you just run up and down with your finger, you can move up and down from Wednesday to Thursday to Friday, all right? So that's there, and there is no hint that that's there, but we know it is somehow because we've used apps like this before. Then you've got the buttons, number 2. You see top there, you've got these buttons, and those are those icons that you can see. But the buttons are the affordances. We know that if we touch that number 2 button, either of the number 2 buttons, that there's something hidden beneath there. Then you've got the horizontal scroll bar, which I've done as number 3, which means that I can drag my finger across there, and I can go across to different dates that way. And then number 4, you've got these panels. So if I clicked on number 4, where it says Wednesday 4 admin, that means I can click on there and I can put in more details on that appointment that I'm that I'm going to do now. You use this every day, but the important thing is understanding that you've got signifiers and you've got affordances. Now, this is, if you could go for this entire task without describing either of these, let's just go back one. But these are examples of affordances on a phone. You can tap. This is what you can do. So don't get confused with the word affordances. These are things that you can do. You can tap, you can double tap, you can drag, you can swipe, you can pinch, you can spread, and you can press. And of course, press is a long hold rather than a tap. So you've got all of those affordances within Android or within a tablet or within iOS, right? You've got all of those affordances. So that's what you can do. But then the next question is, how are you going to show people that that's what you can do? And that's where signifiers come in. So signifiers, let's look at the signifiers here. If we look at the button background, so look at the top there again. Those sort of those button backgrounds, so different colour. You see Wednesday the 4th, different colour. That tells you that can be. That tells you that that's today, and it tells you that you can tap it. There's no hint of the scroll bar. It's just assumed that you figure it out. But there is a kind of clue, because if you see you've got Wednesday the 4th at the top and you've got Thursday the 5th just peeking out down the bottom, that is the signifier that tells you that you can do a vertical scroll. It's clever, isn't it? I'd never thought about that before. You've also got the horizontal one. There is no hint other than the fact that it's going 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's logical that on the right hand side there is 9. It isn't that obvious because it took me a while to find that, so that signifier didn't work that well for me. You've got the symbolic icons. So for example, we've got, you see this time bottom, middle bottom, they've got the magnifying glass. That means search. Everyone knows that means search. So how are you going to use these in your app? How are you going to use these signifiers to show what can be done, to show the affordances? You've also got negative. So things can be greyed out to show that you can't touch it, that you can't touch it yet, that you need to do something else before you can go in there. So for example, changing an appointment for yesterday, you can't do that because why would you want to? Because you can't go back in time. So you've got all of these different signifiers. Now, don't get too bamboozled if you're thinking, why is he throwing affordances and signifiers at me? I'll tell you why, because you're designing an app, and this is what is going through the mind of a designer, so it is really interesting, and it will help you do this task D1. So when you use signifiers, you're revealing an object's affordance. So in English, you're showing what can be done with a given app. You've got labels, and you've got colour, and you've got patterns, all right? So a little bit of a quiz, because I've talked quite a lot. This is a screenshot. In fact, this is an image that I took of the TV because my kids obsessively watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine to the point where I think I've seen every episode at least twice, which is most dispiriting. But you can see I took a screenshot of an app that I was using to look at it, which is called Filmic Pro. So can I ask you in the comments, can you see I've put an octagon there? Has it got 8 sides? I think so. I've put an octagon for number 1. Can anyone tell me what that symbol means? Number 1. Or in fact, there's another number 1 up there, which is on the top left. So either of those two, could you put in the comments what those mean? Or in fact, if you can spot what any of them mean, put the number and then write down what you think they do. Bearing in mind, I don't think any of you will have used Filmic Pro before. Maybe you have done. But what do you think any of these mean? I've got number 2 down there, bottom left. I've got 3. I'm trying to think what 3 does myself, actually. Any ideas? What do these different numbers do? I'm guessing number 1 you probably know. As you're doing that, it's quite interesting to think about how we are hardwired to use these apps. Because you've been using apps since you were absolutely tiny, you know what number 1 means. You probably have a good idea what number 6 does because of the design of the button. So try and get your answers in here, because I'm sat here like Norman No Mate staring at the comments and no one's put anything in there yet. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to put a number and then what you think that performs on the app. Okay, 5, crop the image. I think that 5 is actually I think that 5 is about focus, oddly enough. I think that 5 and 1 are kind of about focus. What do we think 6 does? What do we think 6 does? Only Josh has been brave enough to put his head above the level. Ah, do you know what? That's a really good call. Actually, 6 is you can hold your finger on that lever and you can move up and down to zoom in and zoom out. It's actually a really good implementation of that on this app, because you can zoom in and zoom out really smoothly. Filmic Pro is a great app for video. It's quite complicated. What do we think number 1 or number 9 does? What do we reckon they do? Bearing in mind they've got, see, the difficulty here is on a phone you've got such a small amount of real estate, and yet you want to do something and you've got enough processing power to do something quite complicated. So I can run through these because you're all being a bit shy. 1 is play, obviously, you knew that. It's that triangle on its side. And you'll know that from Walkmans, from music systems, that's become the standard for play. We know that 7, that cog, that means you're going into settings. Everyone knew that. We've got, I think A is for adding text on the left hand side. We've then got number 4 and 5, which are to do with focus. And then we've also got number 9, the extreme right hand side, and that's to record. So you will have known some of those, even if you decided not to tell me. I'm going to move on really quickly and talk about a couple more things: white space and negative space. So you can talk about in D1 how, and bearing in mind doing D1 is very easy once you've made your wireframe, because when you make your wireframe, these are all the things that you will be considering, or you should be considering. White space is how you use the space around the elements in your app. Think about the latest Google implementation of all of their apps, and they've gone for huge amounts of white space. Now, white space, just to be confusing, doesn't have to be white. It's the space where nothing's happening. However, it is the space that frames everything else. So the space that's filled is called positive. The space that isn't filled is called negative. Here is the classic, this would be again first year design school at university. White space helps to mold the image. So obviously, what do you see when you look at this image? Answers in the comments, please. What do you see when you look at this image? You'll have seen, I'm guessing, optical illusions of this sort before. Be quite interesting to see what you see. So what is interesting about this is that this gives you a demonstration. So you see faces. Can anyone see anything else? Josh sees faces. If you now focus on the white part, what do you see? So don't look at the black part at all, just focus on the white part. What do you see then? And that, for all the talking that I do, is the biggest and simplest explanation of positive and negative space, okay, of white space. So either, yeah, exactly, so you've got faces or a vase. So the way in which you organise the space in which nothing's happening has a massive impact on the look and the feel of your app. And of course, the issue that app designers have when it comes to phones is that you don't have much real estate. Phones are quite small. They're kind of, what, this big? Or if you go and buy the bigger ones, they're about that big, but the smaller ones are about this size. And you've got to get an awful lot of information on there. So either you put a lot of information on, a lot of clickability onto one screen, or else you spread it across 4 or 5 different screens. But if you do that, it takes more learning. If you do that, you've got to do more clicks to find things, and it can be a real pain in the neck to use. So the sweet spot is that you can look at it, it's simple to use, it's easy to use, you know how to use most of it, you haven't got to send people on a tutorial to use it, but equally it looks nice, but it's all there. And that sweet spot is something that you're going to work at a little bit when you're doing your work for P4. Okay, 41. I'm going to jump over this slide because I explain this in great detail on the videos I put on YouTube. But your colour theory. Colour theory is a really rich vein of work for you to do for this D1 task. Talk about the colours that you used and why you used them. All right. So I'm no artist, but colours that work together. So you can see primary colours, and that's the colour wheel. So when designers are putting together an app, or anything for that matter, they'll have this colour wheel, and they know that colours that are the opposite side work together. Colours that are in the third quadrant, the primary colours, like you can see there, they'll work together. The analogous colours, the ones that are next to each other, tend to work. Complementary, opposite, secondary. So you can see all of these combinations generally work. People often ask why black isn't there. It's because it's not a colour, it's a shade. So look at how this works. These are some well-known brands, and again you'll be thinking about the colours that you'll use. So look at Safari, Ferrari, and you've got the black horse and the yellow, and look at how the yellow, the red and the green, look at where they appear on the colour wheel. Then look at MasterCard, you've got the colours right next to each other. Krispy Kreme. Hello, Mr. Whitley. How are you? Nice to catch up with you. How's life? We're having a lot of fun talking about colour theory and seeing how we can solve the D1 task for their Unit 6. We're talking about colour theory and talking about how they can think about how colours work well together. So use that colour wheel to try to put together a look that works. Krispy Kreme, and you can see it's classic, isn't it? You've got the green and the red. Have a look at the colour wheel. See how the green and the red are opposite each other? Simple, isn't it? So use that colour wheel, and that's a rich vein of information for you to talk about your designs and to talk about the advantages and disadvantages. So why did you choose this range of colours? Use the colour wheel to explain why, and say what else you played around with. Like I said, this is really quite straightforward. So that's your colour theory done. So this is the to-do, this is the kind of shortened version of everything. For this D1 task that needs to be done over half term, comes in on the Sunday, if I see under half a side, it means you haven't done enough. If I'm seeing about a page of A4, or 2/3 of a page of A4, and it's really high quality, that's about the amount. But it's not about the amount, it's about you showing an understanding of it. Pick a couple of things, pick 2 things. Pick your background, pick your typeface, pick your use of white space, affordance, signifiers. Typeface is a really easy one to choose. And I'm not going to go into big details on typeface now because we're at the 44-minute point where I want to try to help people who are struggling with M2 afterwards. But I've got a separate video on YouTube about serif and sans serif fonts and why you choose one over another. Okay? Think about how many screens you'd use. So pick 2 of those and discuss what you did, the advantages and the disadvantages, and what else you'd consider doing. And that's all you need to do for 2 of those. And that is D1 done and dusted. The typeface I'm not going to go into, but I recommend you do choose typeface and talk about the different types of fonts and who it's going to be used for. So for example, and a few things to consider about not mixing up fonts. So for example, can you picture the start of The Simpsons and it goes The Simpsons and then the font appears? If that was the font they used on the news to announce 300 people having died of COVID-19, it would be so wrong in so many ways because it's a fun font, it's informal, it's designed for kids. But equally, if they use Times Roman numeral for The Simpsons, it would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? So think about how the typeface or the font that you use is going to suit the application or the people who you're producing the application for. So that's a bit more about fonts and typefaces. You can watch the other video on that. And this is what you need to think about. label the advantages and the disadvantages of the design you've come up with for your for your prototype in P3, for your wireframe diagram rather. State the alternatives. I could have done this, but actually when I did try that, it didn't work because of this. In the end, I went for that because I felt it looked good for this reason. And show a screenshot about what you're discussing. 2/3 of a side of A4, done and dusted. So it's going to take you half an hour to watch all the videos that I've done for you. It's going to take you probably half an hour to get the your wireframe working in PowerPoint, and I reckon it'll take you another half an hour to write your 2/3 of a page of it. So I'm going to pause there for a moment, and I'm going to ask you for any questions that you might have on D1. Mr. Whitley, how are you? So do me a favour, everyone. Let's do the old the numbers game. 3 is going to be that for D1, you might slightly hate me for giving this to you over the half term, but 3 is I understand what I have to do. 2 is I kind of get some of it, but I'm not quite there. And 1 is you've just wasted half an hour of my life. I could have been fast asleep. So could you please get your numbers into the comments for me? And again, will take no insult, because if you're saying a 1, that means that we can have a bit more of a chat about what needs to be done. Josh has come back with a 3. Aaron's come back with a 3. Kane's come back with a 3. That is really good. So that's good. Everyone's quite happy. So like I say, I'm sorry that this is being set over the half term, but my advice to you is get this done today, and then you get an entire week to yourself, because this really is a simple task. And with the work you're doing on P2, no, I'm lying to you, with the work you're doing on P3, the more that you put into your wireframe and think about creating the different interfaces for maybe 3 or 4 different pages of your app, that would actually be another task done in advance. So you will have a week to bask in glory later on if you get that done. But if you don't, again, it's not a huge task. So would anyone like me to cover anything else on M2? Because I've got all of the M2 stuff waiting here to go. So M2 is the last port of call today. You've done very well to last 50 minutes. But would any of you, either emailing me or in the comments, have you got any areas of M2 where you're thinking, I don't know what to do? My aim with M2, which is a big task, was just to help you understand that you've got 5 mini essays to write. Deal with them one at a time. First of all, come up with your solution and talk about technically how you're going to solve it, which programming language are you going to use to make the app, and then talk about the economics and what it'll cost. Cost of you, cost of the coder, cost of any hardware or software. After that, you've got smaller essays to do on the legal side of it, GDPR. If you consider GDPR alone, that's fine. And then you're talking about the operational side of things. How will day-to-day life change for Justin? What will he have to do now? What will he have to do when he has the app he hasn't done before? What won't he have to do? What will he have to do with the dash cam? And then, and that's pretty much you done then. There's one that I've forgotten actually. But that's how you need to break it down, is just into those 5 mini essays.